Well, hey folks, it's your old pal King Krampus, and welcome back to Total Party Skills. Last night, I watched the first episode of Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix. Now, not to bury the lead, I guess my basic summation of what the show strikes me as ancient aliens, minus the aliens, which is a minor improvement. I went into it trying to have a little bit of an open mind. I'm not anti Graham Hancock and his ideas. They do have at least a thread of plausibility. I think much of the problem surrounding the controversies of what he has to say is just the general way people interpret words like civilization and advanced civilization. Uh, Nomadic hunter-gatherers have a civilization. And so an advanced civilization actually has a really, really low bar. But when we hear advanced civilization, we think, big tall steel buildings with glass and cell phones and electricity. In reality, we need to come up with something beyond advanced to describe what we have as a society right now. But, the idea that human history has like large missing chapters, the great forgetting and all that kind of stuff, going back to the Ice Age and what came before that is not entirely outlandish. There are reasons why you did see agricultural societies start to crop up in certain areas, and even as the beginning of the show starts off and they're describing this progression of things, it's like, and then suddenly they were doing this, and then suddenly they were doing that. Thousands of years later, and then thousands of years later, we started doing this. It's like, I don't know, that seems like incremental progression to me, and not just a switch was flipped and suddenly, the lights are on, so to say. However, much like how Elon Musk gets credited with coming up with ideas that come out of old science fiction, actually, a lot of the stuff that Graham Hancock is proposing isn't exactly the newest shit under the sun. It's sort of the basis for a lot of the ideas behind a lot of the classic pulp fantasy. Part of why I feel it's appropriate to bring the show up on a channel that largely deals with role-playing game and role-playing game adjacent subjects is that a lot of role-playing games draw from the same kind of pulp fantasy historical stuff that Graham Hancock is promoting. My own games, the Expedition to Ancient Egypt, Pax Luporum, they all share a common timeline, and that timeline is rooted in one in which there was an ancient civilization before the end of the Ice Age that dwelled upon the Green Sahara before it turned into desert and all that kind of stuff, and they ended up becoming the original mermen because they fled under the sea and all this kind of shit. Totally fictional, not real, did not happen. Only one episode in, I've heard some people say, oh, this is supporting, white supremacist ideas. I have not yet seen that, albeit it could easily end up bringing up Indo-European type stuff. Several years ago, I kind of remember there's like a little cascade of various channels on YouTube that started talking about Indo-European mythology, and it's the root of a lot of basic common myths and the root of a lot of basic languages and culture and yada yada yada. And at first it's like, oh, that's interesting, until you realize that, well, that's a rebrand of what used to just be called Aryanism. So, it's not that it's factually inaccurate. It's just you do kind of have to take a little grain of salt from people who are talking about these things and exactly what their real motivations are. I don't think Graham Hancock's in that category. As a show itself, though, just to critique the actual episode, it really was a weak opening. Their example was a site in Indonesia that was largely just a bunch of jumbled volcanic rocks on top of a volcanic hill, and trying to make it out that they had created some sort of rounded step pyramid maybe with it, just based on looking at the site. And while it's perfectly plausible that human beings have the ability to pick up and stack stones, even going back that far, the area it's in doesn't really seem to be like a good trade hub in and of itself. Although, during the Ice Age, when more of the seafloor was exposed, Indonesia was part of a large peninsula, and it is situated where it's kind of at a crossroads area between major continental bodies. Most of the earliest civilizations seem to appear in regions, that serve as a junction between larger land areas. That's why Central America, the Middle East, and Indonesia, as a bridge between Australia and mainland Asia, it could have served as that. Like I said, there's a thread of plausibility here. One of the problems with the site he's talking about, though, is that the rocks are like the same rocks that build up that hill. Now, most megalithic sites, the stuff has been brought from a distant area to be set up. Stonehenge, those rocks did not come from right there where Stonehenge was built. The pyramids of Giza, obviously, were not constructed from stones that were sourced right there where the pyramids were built, so on and so forth. Also, as a step structure, like if they were like trying to like do some like high altitude farming, like you see in like other Asian societies in more modern times, or even with South American Incan types, sure. But like it's not like the land surrounding it couldn't have also been converted to cropland if they were doing such things. And in fact, it was a fairly limited amount of space. The more likely reason why someone would want to build, a structure like that up on a hill might have been more for defensive purposes, but as far as defensive structures go, it didn't really seem to fit that bill either. I'm willing to think that it's probably just the native rock from that hill, as part of a volcanic intrusion of magma, surrounded by like other materials, softer stone and soil and all that kind of stuff. And over the many millennia, since that area was uplifted off the seafloor by plate tectonics, the much like how you get some of the mesa formations and stuff here in the States, as the softer materials get weathered away, you have this central column of the harder volcanic rock. And, considering that region has lots of volcanic activity and earthquakes, at some point something could have just shaken it where it cracked the top and it just kind of falls apart. And you just get this jumble of rocks that kind of looks like something, but isn't. Like in terms of the kind of rock, it's the same kind of those little hexagonal tubes that sometimes form, like you see at the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, where they do make naturally useful building blocks if you can cut them through. They did make a point of bringing up an island in Micronesia that has an old human-constructed city that uses the exact same blocks. However, there's still like an 8,000 or 9,000 year gap in between the two sites as to when they're saying they're occupied. So that's an awful long time for them to be like a direct descendant of that building technique. And also, those rocks were sourced from somewhere else. It's the fact that these rocks came from right underfoot. And I don't know. I don't want to, like I said, there's a plausibility to it somewhat. But if you're looking for, your first episode of your show where you're trying to sell people on this big idea that's going to like radically change people's view of history and yada, 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 then I really feel you should have led off with something a bit more compelling and hard to poke holes in than the site they started off in the first episode. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue watching it. Maybe I'll kind of judge that based on whether or not anyone actually, engages with this video or not, as whether or not it's worth my time. As I said, a lot of role-playing games and pulp fantasy, do draw on all these sorts of ideas when you get, back into like ancient Lemurian and Mew and Atlantean kind of stuff. Looking over some of the stuff they have to come in the next 7 episodes. Do we really need an episode about Bimini Road? Do we really have to go there? They should have let off with Göbekli Tepe. I mean, that's really what people are showing up for anyway, if you're the kind of person who's inclined to watch this sort of stuff. It was weird seeing a TV show that had so many clips from the Joe Rogan Experience. And in fact, you probably could have just aired that and have gotten all this exact same material out. The scenes of him talking with the archaeologists there were just very staged. It's very reminiscent of History Channel programming, and not the good kind of History Channel programming. However, with a bit of a bigger budget, so you got nicer camera definition and good graphics and crap. The ends off with like a montage talking about ancient peoples, trying to like maintain some sort of mystery and legend of what happened in the Ice Age, and they're showing a bunch of art and statues from Mayan sites, which also are like, okay, guys, there's like a 10,000 year gap between the end of the Ice Age and when the Mayans started building shit. So I don't think any of those statues they were carving had anything to do with shit they may or may not possibly have remembered through oral traditions from the end of the Ice Age. The idea that some of our root myths do kind of emerge from that period or prior to that period is fine. Human beings back then were arguably smarter than we are now. They just did not have the buildup of infrastructure. That's part of why they needed their brains as much as they did, because they had to memorize everything to a degree that we don't have to. I heard someone make a point of like, you take a modern human being, you set them out in the forest and tell them they got to make some stone tools. They're not going to know what kind of rock to use or what kind of rock to use to make the other rock into the thing they need to use. They're not going to know what kind of rocks are going to help them make fire. And so the idea that Stone Age people who were very familiar with the working with stone could be able to figure out how to cut giant limestone blocks is not a huge leap of logic. Our perplexity over like, how did these ancient people do this is pretty lame on our part, and kind of a sign of like, we kind of dehumanize our own ancestral past by making them out to be like just a bunch of dumb grunting cavemen, which is not what they were. But there's morons out there who are going to hear the terms advanced civilization in the Ice Age, and they're going to think of cities and flying cars and teleporters and other shit straight out of more like classic science fiction tropes. And that's not what was being talking about. People who could do some just basic horticultural farming and build a wooden palisade would be enough to qualify as an advanced civilization, especially when compared to more stone-aged, natural human beings around them. I think a lot of our problem is the way that we use the word primitive and describe some peoples as primitive. It's probably more accurate to describe primitive peoples as people who have a natural lifestyle, how humans lived the majority of our existence. We tend to forget that we live in a very aberrant period right now. We rest on our laurels, acting like we have achieved the end of history and that we are the best and the rest can all go suck it. And that's arrogant in the extreme. We have like no basis of comparison to determine what kind of longevity we're going to be able to have with a techno-industrial society. This can all come crashing down around us. And if it does, archaeologists 10,000 years in the future aren't going to have quite so many questions as to whether or not any of the stuff we've done was real, because we're going to leave all sorts of things for them to find that are clearly not the products of natural processes, from the plastics to the metal structures to the rusted out old hulks of cars buried under the ground and all that other sorts of good stuff to come. Oh, all the mining that's going to be done in our fucking trash piles for materials and methane gas and all other sorts of things. They're not going to question our existence. They will question why we have Nicolas Cage's face on so many things, though, and they'll probably think he was a very important king or noble that was beloved across the Western world. I mean, there's not a whole lot of people that get to have their face put on sequin pillows. So anyway, like I said, if I feel like there's any decent amount of views or feedback on this video, I might make myself go ahead and continue to watch this series so I can review more episodes and what they have to say for themselves. But this opening was not a very strong one, and so my natural inclination is to be like, it's already seen it kind of a thing. It's not like it's throwing anything at me that I've never heard before or I'm not already aware of. So it's up to you. It's up to you, good citizen of the internet, to do the thing. And so do the things, hit buttons, hit like and subscribe, check out Total Party Skills on DriveThruRPG. As I said, my game series is based on concepts that, are very much in line with the sorts of crap that Graham Hancock is talking about, albeit mine is very openly fictional, as opposed to being proposed as like, no, no, this is the actual real truth that they don't want you to know. So I'll leave links below. Have a Merry Krampus and stay waspinated.